So the running back rankings that we're going through for Week 10 fantasy football, they're a lot easier than what we had last week when we were missing Christian McCaffrey, Travis Etienne, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. We've got a lot of good guys back this week, so we're going to have some more clear, easier rankings here for Week 10 fantasy football, and that's what we're going through. The running back rankings for Week 10 fantasy football. That's what we're doing here today, guys. And I'm filming this very early on Wednesday morning, so please go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. And once I hit 7,500 subscribers, I'll be giving away a lot of these hats. So please make it happen as soon as possible, guys. Let's go ahead and dive right into these rankings right now. So number one, he's back in his own tier, where exactly he belongs. And you'll see everybody else is just at least a tier below him. Christian McCaffrey, it doesn't really matter who he's taking on, but he's taking on the Jaguars. Even if the San Francisco offense hasn't been running their best over the past several weeks, and they have not, it doesn't matter because you can see on the screen how involved Christian McCaffrey is and also just how efficient he is in getting in the end zone. He's their offense. Like, Brock Purdy has struggled over the past several weeks. Christian McCaffrey has always been their main piece of this offense. So even taking on Jacksonville, you fire him up. And then you can see in tier 2, starting it off with, I got Travis Etienne right here at number 2. Not only have I been big on Travis Etienne since day one, but when you compare those numbers to what we just showed with Christian McCaffrey, they're almost identical. Like the workload, carries per game, targets per game, they're almost identical as far as getting the volume goes. Now the big difference here is where Travis Etienne is not as efficient as Christian McCaffrey. It actually is kind of shocking that he's not even averaging 4 yards per carry. It doesn't matter because, again, the San Francisco 49ers defense is not a great matchup on paper, but they've been struggling recently. They've had their own set of issues. Now, I think they're going to be better after the bye week, and now that they've acquired another great defensive lineman in Chase Young, I think they're going to be a tough out, but Travis Etienne to me is still definitely inside the top 2. And then Austin Ekeler at 3 is also a great option this week. Now, the problem with Austin Ekeler that I've seen over the weeks is that when you watch him, he really hasn't been super efficient. Like, without those trips to the end zone, he would be a problem. Well, that's the thing is there's no one who is more predictive about getting touchdowns over the past several seasons than Austin Ekeler. He's like a lock to get in every week. It's ridiculous, and that's exactly what he needs every single week because he's actually not quite as efficient. And there could be room for error here against Detroit. I'm not going to say that don't start Austin Ekeler. Obviously, he's a top 3 running back on my rankings for a reason. You continue to play Austin Ekeler, but against Detroit this week, it might be a tough matchup. Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara back-to-back here. And man, Derrick Henry rose up these rankings really fast. I feel like we're back in 2021, 2020 all over again. He's just a great option right now. With Will Levis taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they've found their quarterback, and it's helped Derrick Henry over the past 2 weeks. He's been more efficient. He's also been getting the workload back. He's averaging closer to 20 carries per game over the last 2 weeks now. So Derrick Henry to me is back right where he always has been for years, just because he's getting the workload back and he's actually becoming more efficient with Will Levis running this offense. And against the Buccaneers, it's great. Alvin Kamara, I was a little bit concerned last week. He had his lowest snap count percentage last week. And since I'm filming this on Wednesday morning, we don't have an injury update on if there was a reason why he had that low snap count last week. And he didn't have many carries. So I'm a little worried heading into the week, but Minnesota's not the worst matchup for him. I just think that we need to find out more information on if there was a reason why he didn't have as many snaps this week. I'm guessing we might find out some information here over the next several days. Jonathan Taylor, Kenneth Walker, 6 and 7. Jonathan Taylor taking on New England, and obviously he just continues to get better and better and better in fantasy every single week. These numbers you're seeing on the screen, they're different from last week. Those were different from the previous week. They're getting better every single week. Now the workload, he still is splitting for the most part with Zach Moss, but he's starting to separate himself from Zach Moss, as I predicted over here at Football Fanalysts Network. I mean, it was never a question as far as who they're going to try to use because he's their investment. So you know they're going to try to use him as much as possible. As long as he continues to play like this and against the New England defense, I'm all over Jonathan Taylor this week. And Kenneth Walker, I'm all over him as well. I've been calling him a buy low trade target for 2 weeks straight now. And this is one of the reasons why. He gets a rebound matchup after 2 tough matchups in a row, and the fact that he was also injured several weeks back. There's no issues here this week with Kenneth Walker. He's taking on Washington. If I'm wrong on this one, we'll have a big come to Jesus moment on Monday night. But Kenneth Walker and me this week, smash play versus the Washington Commanders. I've got him having a massive rebound game. David Montgomery at number 8, taking on the Chargers here. Now, David Montgomery, we're assuming he comes back. Obviously, I don't know. Like I said, filming this on Wednesday morning. From what I know, he has returned to practice. I expect him to play again in this game. And when he does, I've got no reservations here. He's going to get back to handling the majority of the carries. The carries will be in his favor. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs, he'll still be a good option. And we'll get to him in a little bit. But Dave Montgomery, the moment he comes back, he's going to continue to handle 16 to 18 carries per game. Tony Pollard, number 9. And I'm worried about Tony Pollard. I'll be honest here, like if Tony Pollard wasn't taking on the Giants this week, he would be a lot lower. He's got to be in the top 10 because he's taking on the Giants. And the first time he played the Giants this year, he absolutely rumbled all over them. So I got Tony Pollard against the Giants here as a big-time great matchup. I mean, obviously, the Giants are having the season from hell. It's been a horrific season for the Giants here. So, to me, this week, Tony Pollard is just a smash play. But, like I said, I'm monitoring the situation. I am not big on what's happening with Tony Pollard right now. Breece Hall and Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs, 10, 11, 12. Breece Hall taking on the Raiders. Great matchup. And I get it, last week was bad, but he was taking on a very tough Chargers run defense. And the Jets couldn't get anything going offensively. I'm not saying that they're going to rebound and have some 30-point game against the Raiders. But what I will say is that the Raiders are dead last at defending the run this year. They're awful stopping the run. So Breece Hall's got a matchup here, and he's always capable of taking big plays. And as someone commented the other night on my What I Got Right and Wrong live stream, he would have had several more fantasy points on that Monday night game against the Chargers if there wasn't so many penalties. So Breece Hall, that's not going to happen every week. I like him this week. And then Joe Mixon at 11 here, taking on the Texans. Joe Mixon has found the end zone 2 straight weeks. This offense is continuing to run more and more efficiently. Taking on Houston, they're not as good of a defense as I thought several weeks back. They gave up a lot to Rashad White in week 9 versus Tampa Bay. Joe Mixon, I think, continues to do very well this week. And Josh Jacobs and him, very interchangeable to me. Because Josh Jacobs, the problem that I have with him this week is this matchup is not good. I get it. There's lots of excitement with Josh Jacobs after last week. I totally understand that. I like Josh Jacobs as a player. The reality is, you see the numbers on the screen, it's been horrendous efficiency. And he's also taking on a much tougher opponent this week. Look at what they just did to Austin Eckler in week 9. This is a very good run defense here. Now, Josh Jacobs, gonna handle all the volume. That's why I like him. But I do say temper expectations coming off a massive week with Josh Jacobs this week. Bejan Robinson at number 13. It's such a difficult position to be put in with Bijan Robinson. I gotta be honest. Like, taking on the Arizona Cardinals, matchup screams, play me and smash start me. But it also, you look at the workload, you look at what the Falcons, they're just a mess right now offensively. So it's so hard for me to rank him any higher than this. And seriously, if he was taking on the Buffalo Bills or the Dallas Cowboys this week, he'd probably be just inside the top 20. I mean, Bijan Robinson, his workload is bad. The thing you hang your hat on this week is that he's efficient, he's a big play guy, he gets in the end zone, and he's got a great matchup here. That's why he's here at 13. Saquon Barkley and Jahmyr Gibbs, 14 and 15. Saquon Barkley, to me, when you look at what's going on, you're obviously getting a true workhorse level back. Like, you don't see many guys getting the amount of touches he's getting. You can see it on the screen. He's handling so much volume. It's very similar to Alvin Kamara level. Now, the problem that he has, there's no offense. He is the entire offense, and I've been saying that for weeks now. It's even more so. They've got Tommy DeVito. Sounds like he came out of Sopranos. And his play was horrendous last week. Now, maybe it's better off a full week of, preparation as a starter, but the Dallas Cowboys defense, oh my God. I mean, Saquon got stifled the first time they played Dallas this year. It's ugly. It's ugly. The only reason he's here is because he handles the workload, but good grief. I've been saying trade away Saquon Barkley for weeks now, and I hope you did because it's going to be hard to do it after this week. Jahmyr Gibbs, 15 at the Los Angeles Chargers. The matchup is not great, but again, I don't think this actually affects Jahmyr Gibbs as much as you think. Because, as I said, I expect David Montgomery to come back to handling the majority of the carry workload. And if you go based on what Dan Campbell said this week, he said they're going to be a committee running back team moving forward because he loved what he saw from Jahmyr Gibbs, but he also knows that David Montgomery is a great carry back. What it tells me, and what he said in his quote, was that we're going to do things that Jahmyr Gibbs is good at, aka getting him involved in the pass. You can see what his numbers are doing on the screen. He's a super efficient player. So my guess is he has anywhere between 5 to 10 carries this week and maybe 6 to 7 targets. They're going to continue to get Jahmyr Gibbs involved. And if he gets involved more in the passing game, I think it's a benefit to him in a matchup like this against the Chargers, who have a very stout run defense. Rashad White at 16, taking on the Tennessee Titans. Rashad White really surprised me last week. I didn't think it was going to be a good week for him. He was a very good fantasy play. He got in the end zone twice. You can't predict that week to week. But in this matchup against Tennessee, it doesn't look like it's going to be much better. But Rashad White, the thing you can hang your hat on with Rashad White is he sees consistent targets. Baker Mayfield really checks the ball down to him a lot. So Rashad White in a matchup versus Tennessee, similar to Jahmyr Gibbs' story, where it's like you look at a guy who's got lots of targets, but then you also look at a guy who is maybe not going to have as efficient of a week running because he's taking on a great run defense. Tennessee is a very good run defense. Now, I think with the targets, he's got to be here at number 16. Aaron Jones and James Cook here, 17 and 18. Aaron Jones taking on the Steelers. On paper, not a great matchup. Doesn't sound like a great matchup. Pittsburgh is 7th worst against rushing in the entire league this season. They're not a good rushing defense. They're a classic bend but don't break offense, meaning they're going to give up yardage, but they're not going to give up as many points. So the big problem with Aaron Jones is that he needs a big play. What you saw last week from Aaron Jones was that if he wasn't involved in a big play, like he got the yardage, he's going to get the yardage again, but can he get back into the end zone? That's really the ultimate question here with Aaron Jones. I'm tempering expectations on Aaron Jones. I think this offense is going to struggle against the Steelers, but I do think that Aaron Jones, as long as he continues to get the volume, could have a good week as far as yardage goes. And James Cook, there's lots of issues here. Obviously, James Cook, his carry total is very week to week. He can get 6 carries, he can get 16 carries. Buffalo is the most unpredictable running team week to week. Now, what I've tried to identify here is where Buffalo does very well. And this might sound obvious when they kick the crap out of opponents like they did against Miami, like they did for several weeks after they lost to the Jets. James Cook was having his best weeks. I expect this to be a pretty definitive win for Buffalo. I think they're going to get after Denver on Monday night in Buffalo. So I really like that personally because I think that gives James Cook more opportunities. And you could see on the screen, dude's been efficient with his work. The problem is the workload's very week to week. I actually really like this matchup for James Cook. I think he's going to do well. Denver's 2nd worst as far as stopping the run goes. The matchup is there. I like James Cook. Javonte Williams, I moved him up because he got the workload against the Chiefs. And that was a good defense that he took on, and he had over 100 all-purpose yards. Javonte Williams is interesting. The problem that he's having is he's taking on the Bills in Buffalo off really a bad stretch for Buffalo. They're in a bad place right now. I think they're going to get the brunt of this because Denver, yes, they looked better against the Chiefs. Their offensive line is still trash. They can't defend Russell Wilson, and they can't run block very well, which is why Javonte has not been very efficient this year. Now, I think that just from a workload perspective, I could see Javonte Williams being inside the top 20, and that's exactly why with a ceiling like that, I got him at 19. Ramondre Stevenson, Alexander Madison, Brian Robinson, they're all so similar in so many ways. Ramondre taking on the Colts, I like the matchup because the Colts are not fantastic, but you look at last week, he got in the end zone. If he didn't get in the end zone, that was not a very good week. He had 9 carries last week. So there's lots of issues here with Ramondre. The reason I've got him above Madison and Brian Robinson is because Madison's taking on the Saints and Robinson's taking on the Seahawks. Now, the reason I have Madison over Robinson is because Without Cam Akers, who, by the way, devastating injury. Not the same Achilles he tore the other Achilles. So both Achilles have been torn in his life. That's tragic. But Alexander Mattison looks to be getting the majority of the workload. And he actually had his best week in fantasy football last week. So I do see the upside here just from a volume perspective. But against New Orleans, that matchup's not as good as the Colts. And then Brian Robinson versus Seattle, he doesn't even see, it's a very similar situation to James Cook, except in contrast with James Cook, Brian Robinson doesn't see targets. So Brian Robinson against the Seahawks in Seattle off a bad loss, I don't like this trajectory for Washington. And Brian Robinson's volume week to week is so unpredictable. Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt at 23 and 24 right here, and they're taking on Baltimore and Baltimore. Now, here's the problem that I have with both of these guys. You can rank them whichever way you want to, personally. Jerome Ford, he was so inefficient last week, and the problem with that is that Cleveland was taking on a much easier opponent. They don't have that luxury this week against Baltimore. Baltimore has been playing downhill football, and they've been excellent defensively. It's really hard to see a tremendous week from either of these running backs. Now, Kareem Hunt has found the end zone basically every single week since he's been a Brown this year. But man, against Baltimore, it's going to be tough. The divisional matchup is always tough, but I do see upside here because Cleveland's offensive line is very good. But just make no mistake, their workload is very much close to each other these days. I've got a lot of issues here with Cleveland and what their run game is like right now. It's just a very uneasy situation right now with Cleveland, especially in this type of matchup here. Chuba Hubbard at 25, taking on the Chicago Bears. They're playing Thursday night, and Chuba Hubbard, the good thing about him is that he's seeing the majority of the carries right now. He's been seeing around 20 carries per game for the past several weeks. Now, the matchup here this week against Chicago, on paper, sounds great. Chicago actually has a decent run defense. They're not exactly some, Vegas Raiders level defense or Denver Broncos level atrocious run defense. But Chuba Hubbard, I do think, has slight upside because they're taking on the Bears this week, and they're just as dysfunctional as the Panthers. So there's really no matchup upside here for Chicago or for Cleveland. It's going to be a very easy, it's going to be a very ugly game to watch, and I do think that both teams have basically equal amount of upside this week. And then Gus Edwards at 26. Gus Edwards has found the end zone the past several weeks. That's been great for fantasy football. The problem with last week, he had 5 carries last week. 5. And I'm not sure, I always say in blowout wins or losses, you can't use that as a mark for future volume for players. You can't do that. Now, 5 carries in a game, that's worrisome for sure. If we were talking about a guy who was getting, 17 carries per game and he got down to, 10 or 11, that wouldn't be as big of a worry. But we're talking about a guy who averages 12 to 16 carries per week, and he gets 5 carries this week. So I got my guard up a little bit here with Gus Edwards because the matchup is so much tougher than his past 2 have been. I got some issues here with Gus Edwards this week. I'd be a little bit worried. Keaton Mitchell, I'm not sure if he's going to really take a ton of volume from Gus Edwards, but I do think that Gus Edwards, we should have our guard up this week with him. And then Zach Moss, taking on the New England Patriots. Fall from grace this week, I understand that. He dropped over 12 spots for me this week from last week. I understand that. And Zach Moss is a guy that I've said in previous weeks, one of the hardest guys for me to evaluate all year in fantasy football. And especially on a week-to-week basis, he's been very, very tough. Now, Zach Moss still was handling work last week in that blowout win versus Carolina. So I don't really make too much of, tons of volume being left off the table. Like, it wasn't like that. Him and Jonathan Taylor are still, for the most part, splitting carries, splitting work. So I do think that Zach Moss has plenty of upside against New England. I just say, after a week like that, we have to leave some room for potential error here if they decide to just go full all in on Jonathan Taylor. I don't think they're doing that. That's why he's still inside my top 30. Diont Foreman at 28, taking on the Panthers on Thursday night. I think Diont Foreman just as much has the upside that Chuba Hubbard does. They're very close in the rankings because of that. Chuba Hubbard, Diont Foreman, they're very, very similar characters right now. I mean, we're looking at a guy who last week handled 20 carries against New Orleans. So it was actually a good sign to see from a volume perspective. Now, the problem is Khalil Herbert looks to be returning this week. What does that do? Another guy added in, and both Roschon Johnson and Khalil Herbert were initially ahead of him on the depth chart. Now, that's changed. Obviously, Khalil Herbert has been on IR, and Rashad Johnson has handled basically nothing with Diont Foreman since he broke out. So I think there's upside here with Diont Foreman. I'm just worried about this workload with all these running backs now in the backfield crowding it. 29 and 30, the Steelers running backs. Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, you can rank them however you desire. I don't have a preference on how they're ranked right now. They've got great matchup potential here with Green Bay. This is a very good upside play. The problem is, you look at the numbers on the screen, they're averaging the exact same amount of fantasy points. And week to week, one of them handles 2 more carries than the other. And one of them finds the end zone, the other one doesn't. It's really hard to tell. As a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, I can't tell you. All I can tell you is that when the first drive, the second drive happened, Najee Harris will be on the field. But throughout the game, you see more and more of Jaylen Warren, so it's unpredictable. They're both deep shots to take. I don't love starting either of them, but I do acknowledge the matchup is very good this week for both of them. And as I do at the end of every single ranking video, I give you my top underdog flex option at the running back position, guys. And this week, it was hard. This week, there was a lot of matchups I just didn't love. A lot of guys I did not love outside of my top 30. I'm actually going to go out on a limb and say Miles Sanders this week. Taking on the Chicago Bears, matchup, like I said, it has potential. And he has seen targets out of the backfield when he was the starter. Now, obviously, the big problem here is how much volume they give him because they declared him not the starter. That's the ultimate problem. But again, this is a very deep shot to take. That's why it's the underdog flex option of the week. But I do think that just in this type of matchup, I think Miles Sanders does have some upside if he can get anywhere from 10 to 12 opportunities in this game. Not necessarily carries, but if you get targets as well, this is an opportunity and a matchup that this team is just as dysfunctional as Carolina. I think there's upside here with Miles Sanders. And if you want to get in on the fun of player prop and daily fantasy football, go down in the description, click on the link for Underdog, and use code FFN for them to match your first deposit up to $100. So let me know what you think of the rankings in the comments below and what questions you need answered for Week 10 fantasy football. And if you want to see the top 30 wide receiver rankings for Week 10 fantasy football, click on this video right here.